He changed my will behind my back, and made me homeless. My revenge was legal. I never thought the day would come when I'd stand on a cold street corner, holding a torn backpack with everything I owned inside. Not after all the years I spent breaking my bones to build a life, a home, for my family. But here I am. 68 years old. Homeless. Not because of poverty, but because of my own son. He didn't steal from me with a gun or a threat. No. His weapon was paperwork, pages I signed with trust instead of eyesight. He told me it was routine estate planning, something all responsible fathers should do. I believed him. I believed the child I raised with these very hands. But hidden in those papers was a switch, my will rewritten, my property transferred, my accounts rerouted. In one signature, I went from homeowner to nothing. From father, to liability. The worst part isn't the cold nights on bus stop benches, or the smell of shelters, or the way strangers look at you like you've already died. The worst part is realizing the warnings were always there, the impatience in his voice, the subtle comments about my age, the way he flinched when I asked for help. I ignored it all. A father always hopes his child still carries the goodness he raised them with. If you want more real stories that shake the heart and open your eyes, make sure you subscribe. Now let me tell you exactly how my own son made me homeless. Before everything collapsed, before the shelters, the benches, the cold concrete, I used to wake up to a house that held decades of memories. That morning stays burned in my mind, not because it was special, but because it was the last morning I still felt like a man with a home. The sun had barely crept over the rooftops, sending soft orange light across my kitchen table. The kettle whistled gently, the way it used to when my late wife, Miriam, would nudge it off the stove with her elbow while humming some old hymn she loved. I made my tea exactly the way she taught me, 3 minutes steeping, 2 teaspoons of honey, and a slow stir to keep the bitterness from settling. That routine was my anchor. 38 years of marriage wrapped into one quiet ritual. The chair beneath me creaked, familiar, dependable. The smell of polished wood floated in the air, faint, but enough to remind me of the nights I stayed up sanding the floors with my son toddling around, trying to help. Back then he used to cling to my sleeve, asking questions about everything, as though I had the world's secrets in my pockets. I never imagined those tiny hands would one day sign documents that would erase me from my own life. That morning, as I sipped my tea and watched the light spill across the kitchen tiles, I felt peaceful. Safe. Certainly not like a man who would soon be sleeping behind grocery stores, guarding his shoes at night so no one would steal them. It's strange how life hides its storms behind the calmest skies. If you enjoy stories like this, stories that peel back the truth of family, loyalty, and betrayal, go ahead and subscribe. There's more to this than pain, there's a lesson carved deep into every step that followed. Because that peaceful morning was the last time the house felt like mine. The very last time I believed my son still saw me as his father. It started with a sentence so small, so casually spoken, that I almost brushed it aside. "Dad, don't you think this house is getting a little big for you?" My son said it while standing in my doorway, arms crossed, eyes scanning the living room like he was already measuring where his own furniture would go. I laughed at first, one of those harmless, fatherly chuckles meant to lighten the moment. But he didn't laugh back. He just tilted his head and added, "I'm only saying it because I care. You shouldn't be living alone in a place this size." The words landed wrong. They didn't feel like concern, they felt like pressure dressed up as kindness. I told him gently that the house wasn't a burden to me. That it held memories I wasn't ready to let go of. Memories of his mother, of him running down the hallway with mismatched socks, of Christmas mornings when he ripped open presents faster than I could blink. But he kept pushing, saying things like, "It's not safe for someone your age," and, "You need something manageable." Manageable. That word stung more than it should have. It made me feel small. Over the next few weeks, the comments kept coming. "Maybe you should just live somewhere quieter. Wouldn't a retirement place be easier? You've done your time, "Dad, it's okay to let go." Every time he said it, there was a tension in his tone. A frustration simmering behind the words. Like he wasn't asking for my comfort, he was asking for my compliance. One afternoon, he stopped by with his wife, and she walked through my home like a realtor assessing property. Barely looked at me. Barely acknowledged the memories carved into every wall. At one point she whispered to him, "We could really do something with this place." She didn't know I heard her. But I did. Something cold crept into my chest that day. Still, I ignored the warning signs. I told myself he was stressed, overwhelmed, trying to help. I convinced myself the son I raised, the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest, would never do anything to hurt me. But betrayal doesn't fall from the sky. It grows quietly, fed by small excuses and ignored moments. And mine was already blooming. People see an old man on the street and think he must have wasted his life, squandered his opportunities, or made terrible choices. But the truth is, I spent every year of my youth, every ounce of strength in my body, building a foundation for my son so he would never taste the bitterness I grew up with. My life wasn't perfect, but I built it with honesty, sweat, and a kind of stubborn hope that only a father can understand. I was 28 when I married Miriam. She had a laugh that could pull the poison out of any bad day. When she told me she was pregnant with our son, I remember lifting her right off the ground and spinning her around the kitchen. We didn't have much, just a cramped apartment and 2 jobs between us, but the joy in that room was bigger than anything I'd ever known. But life doesn't care about joy. It doesn't honor it or guard it. When my son was 3, Miriam became sick, first little things, then big things, then everything all at once. Hospital visits ate up our savings. I worked overtime shifts at the construction yard, then cleaned offices at night to pay for her treatments. I slept so little that sometimes I'd forget whether I was walking into work or walking out of it. But I did it. I did it because I loved her, and because I needed my son to grow up seeing what devotion looks like. She passed away when he was 6. The day we buried her, he held my hand with fingers so small, so trusting, and asked me, "Daddy, who will take care of you now?" I remember kneeling in the mud beside that grave and telling him, "You will, someday. And I'll take care of you until then." I made a promise that anchored itself into my bones. Raising him alone wasn't easy. Children don't come with instructions, and grief doesn't pause for fatherhood. I burned meals. I forgot school events. I worked too many hours. But I always came home to him. Always. Every paycheck, every decision, every sacrifice was made with him in mind. When he wanted to play football, I saved for months to buy him the gear. When he wanted piano lessons, I sold my old motorcycle to pay for them. I never let him see how hard it was behind the scenes. I wanted him to feel like the world was a place that responded to effort, that dreams could be afforded with work, not worry. When he turned 16, he asked for a car like his friends had. I couldn't afford it. But I did something worse, I took a loan to make it happen. I justified it by telling myself that a father's job was to fill gaps, not leave them open. He drove that car for years, barely treating it with care, but his smile the day I gave it to him, that made the debt worth it. Years passed, and he grew into a young man with ambitions. He talked about wanting to start a business, something in real estate. I didn't understand any of it, but I listened. I always listened. When he said he needed help with startup capital, I dipped into the retirement account I'd built over decades. A small sum, but it was all I had managed to save. I handed it over without hesitation. "Just promise me you'll stay honest," I said. He nodded, hugged me, and told me I was the best father in the world. Later, when he got married, I paid for half the wedding. I didn't have to, but I wanted to give him a day he wouldn't forget. I worked side jobs, took smaller meals, wore the same worn-out boots for 3 years just so I could hand him a check on his wedding day. I remember the way he looked at me then, grateful, proud to call me his father. I held on to that look for years. When he bought his first house, he called me excited, but anxious. He didn't have the down payment the bank required. I sold a small piece of land I inherited, my last gift from my own father, to help him secure that home. "It's all for you," I said. "Everything I have is yours." I meant it. I lived my life believing my role was to build him higher, even if it meant leaving nothing beneath my own feet. Through all these years, I never asked for anything in return. Not money. Not favors. Not gratitude. All I wanted was respect. A seat at his table. A place in his life. But as he grew older and more successful, he became someone I barely recognized. Conversations became shorter. Visits became rare. When he spoke, it was often with a thin layer of impatience, like he was tolerating me rather than enjoying my presence. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself he was just busy, stressed, overwhelmed. But disrespect doesn't announce itself with a trumpet. It creeps in quietly, settling in the space between, "Dad, I need you," and, "Dad, you're in the way." And once it takes root, it grows like a weed, choking out every memory of love that came before it. I didn't realize how much power I'd handed him over the years, financially, emotionally, legally. I had built everything around him, and in doing so, I put the entire structure of my life in his hands. And he knew it. The boy I raised with everything I had was slowly becoming the man who would take it all away. The day I learned the truth didn't come with thunder or shouting. It arrived in a quiet envelope, thin, pale, ordinary. The kind of envelope you'd expect a utility bill to come in, not the end of your life as you knew it. My son had shown up a week earlier with a stack of papers tucked neatly into a leather folder. He'd spoken in that gentle, overly controlled tone people use when they're hiding something. "Dad, we need to update your estate documents. It's just for protection. You're getting older, and if anything happens, I need to be able to help." I remember blinking slowly, confused. "But my will is already set. Your mother and I prepared it years ago." He shook his head. "That's outdated, Dad. Laws change. Trust me, this is routine." He placed a pen in my hand the way a doctor hands a prescription to a patient. I didn't read much, small print blurred together these days. My eyesight had been slipping, and I'd been too proud to admit it. I signed where he pointed, trusting him the way I always had. But trust, in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon. A few days later, a social worker came to the house. She said the bank had flagged discrepancies in my account activity and needed confirmation directly from me. Confused, I asked her what she meant. That's when she handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of the documents I had signed. Except they weren't at all what he said they were. My hands trembled as I scanned the pages. There, in ugly, bold letters, was a phrase that punched the air out of my lungs. Transfer of ownership, full control of assets, including property, bank accounts, and legal authority, granted to beneficiary, my son. Another line followed. Revocation of previous will and testament. New executor, son. All assets to be transferred immediately upon notarization. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I had given away my entire life, every brick, every saved dollar, every memory etched into that home, without even realizing it. The social worker must have seen my face drain of color. "Mr. Lawson," she said softly, "did you understand the nature of what you signed?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I couldn't wrap my mind around the betrayal. "That's not what he told me," I finally whispered. She exchanged a troubled look with her colleague. "You may have grounds to dispute this, if it was signed under misinformation or pressure. But right now, legally, your son has full control." Legally. Legally, I no longer existed as the owner of my own life. The moment she left, I called my son. My voice shook so much I barely recognized it. He answered on the second ring. "Dad, What's going on? You lied to me, I choked out. You lied about those documents. You took everything. There was a pause. Not a guilty one, an irritated one. Dad, calm down. I didn't take anything. I'm protecting you. You're not the same anymore. You forget things. You misplace things. You're vulnerable. I am not incompetent, I snapped. He sighed. Look, this is for the best. I have a family to think about. I can't keep worrying about what happens if something goes wrong with you. This gives me the authority to handle things. It gives you the authority to take everything I've ever worked for, I said. His reply sliced through me. Well, someone had to. You weren't managing anything properly. A silence settled between us, one so heavy it felt like the final shovelful of dirt on a coffin. When the call ended, I stared at the papers again. My signature sat there, helpless, trusting, blind. I felt the room tilt. I grabbed the counter just to stay steady. That was the moment the betrayal became real. Not hinted. Not implied. Real. My son had legally erased me from my own life, and all it took was a pen. The day everything truly ended didn't arrive with rage or warning. It came quietly, like a thief walking across a carpeted floor, until suddenly, I was standing outside my own home with nowhere to go. It was late afternoon when I heard a knock. I assumed it was a neighbor or the mailman. Instead, it was my son, standing stiffly on the porch with a locksmith beside him and a thick folder clutched in his hand. His wife hovered behind him, arms folded, eyes sharp with impatience. Dad, he said, not offering a hug, not even a smile. We need to talk. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. Before I could speak, he stepped inside like the house already belonged to him. The locksmith followed, carrying a small metal case. I closed the door behind them slowly. What's going on? My son exhaled, as if he were the one carrying the burden. We're moving forward with transitioning you into assisted living. The paperwork is finalized. I froze. Assisted living? I never agreed to that. He held up the folder. You did. It's part of the authorization documents you signed. I told you, it's safer for you. You need help. I don't need help, I said. I need my home. His wife stepped forward. Your home, she repeated, almost amused. Legally, it's no longer yours. Everything is under my husband's name now. We're trying to make this smooth, but you're making it harder. My breath caught. I built this house. Every room. Every wall. I raised you here. He didn't blink. And now it's time to move on. You can't take care of yourself. The facility we chose for you has good reviews. Facility. As if I were a patient, not a person. As if my life had been reduced to a bed number and a medication chart. I'm not leaving, I said firmly. This is my home. My son nodded toward the locksmith. Please start. The man moved to the front door lock, fitting his tools in with professional detachment. The clicking of metal echoed through the hallway like hammer blows. I stepped back, stunned. You're changing the locks. While I'm still living here. He didn't even look ashamed. It's for your safety. And ours. You're confused, Dad. You won't be able to manage this place anymore. I'm confused. I whispered. Or am I just inconvenient? For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, annoyance, not guilt. Dad, don't start. The locksmith finished the front door and moved to the back door. The humiliation spread across my skin like a fever. My own son had brought a stranger to dismantle the last thing I owned, piece by piece, while he stood there justifying it like a business transaction. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. My clothes hung neatly, shirts Miriam had ironed, jackets I'd worn to work for years, a scarf she knitted before she passed. I wanted to gather everything, but he appeared behind me. "You can take essentials," he said. "A bag or two. The rest we'll sort later." "The rest?" I turned slowly. "My life isn't a pile of clutter you get to sort." He rubbed his forehead, impatient. "Dad, please. You're making this dramatic." I stared at him, the boy I once shielded from every storm. The boy who cried when he scraped his knee. The boy who used to run into my arms. Now he was a man who looked at me like I was a burden he couldn't unload fast enough. I packed a single bag. A few clothes. A framed photo of Miriam. My father's old pocketknife. And the worn Bible he used to read every morning. When I came back to the living room, the locksmith handed my son a new set of keys. My son took them without hesitation. He walked me to the door, not with love, but with efficiency, like an employee escorting someone out of a building. "Your room at the facility will be ready by tomorrow," he said. "Tonight you can stay at a motel." I felt the ground sway beneath me. "And who's paying for that?" He didn't answer. I stepped outside. The air felt colder than it should have. He closed the door behind me. A door I had installed with my own hands. A door I had painted with my wife while our son slept in the next room. Now it was shut in my face. I stood on the porch, holding the single bag that contained the scraps of my life. Neighbors stared from across the street, confused, whispering, unsure if they were supposed to intervene or pretend nothing was happening. When my son drove away, he didn't even look back. I spent my first night on a bench outside the local bus station, clutching my bag, staring at the darkness. That was the night I stopped being a father in his eyes. And started becoming the man who would make him face everything he'd done. The first night outside wasn't the worst. It was the second. The third. The ones after that, when the shock wore off and reality wrapped its fingers around my throat. When the cold seeped into my bones like it had been waiting years for an invitation. When I realized no one was coming back for me. The bench behind the bus station became my bed. The humming of passing engines became my lullaby. My bag, my single, pathetic bag, was my pillow. I kept my hand on it every night, gripping it so tightly my knuckles cracked. Not because the items inside were valuable, but because they were all I had left. On the fourth night, a gust of freezing air swept through the open space and forced me to curl into myself like a child. My chest ached. My joints screamed. I used to sleep in a warm bed with my wife beside me, her hand resting gently on my arm. Now, streetlights cast long shadows across my body, and the ground felt colder than death. Mornings were worse. Waking up groggy and stiff, realizing the day ahead held nothing, not work, not family, not purpose. Just survival. I learned quickly how the world treats a homeless old man. People avoid your eyes. They walk faster when they approach you, as if poverty could jump from your skin onto theirs. A few toss coins without looking. Others whisper cruel things thinking you can't hear. Some pretend to help just to ease their conscience. But most look right through you, like you're a ghost haunting a sidewalk. On my 7th day out there, I went to the community shelter. They gave me a bowl of watery soup and a cot squeezed between two men who smelled like stale alcohol and heartbreak. When the lights went out, the coughing began, deep, rattling coughs that echoed through the room like a chorus of despair. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, holding the photo of Miriam close to my chest, whispering her name like a prayer. The next morning, someone stole the shoes I left by my cot. Old brown boots I'd worn for 10 years, boots I'd walked job sites in, boots Miriam once polished for me before an important meeting. Gone. I searched the shelter, asked the volunteers, even checked the dumpster. Nothing. I walked barefoot to the donation counter and asked if they had any spares. They handed me a pair of sneakers 2 sizes too big. I wore them because I had no choice. With every step, I felt humiliation tearing deeper into me. A week later, I saw my son for the first time since he'd removed me from my home. He was driving his black SUV, the one I contributed money toward when he couldn't afford the down payment. I was walking along the sidewalk, clutching a paper bag with leftover bread. I recognized him instantly. He recognized me too. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. He looked away. He didn't stop. He didn't roll down the window. He didn't even slow the car. He left me standing on the pavement like a discarded object. That moment cut deeper than homelessness ever could. Because that was when I finally accepted that the person I had raised, fed, clothed, protected, loved, could see me suffering and still choose indifference. He didn't view me as his father anymore. He viewed me as an inconvenience he had successfully removed from his life. Nights blurred into one another. I slept wherever I could, behind grocery stores, under bridges, inside the small park restroom when rain hit hard. Some nights I'd wake up to teenagers laughing as they passed by, calling out insults like old bum or fossil. I learned to stay quiet, to keep my head down, to avoid conflict. But inside, something was changing. A slow burn of anger. A tightening of resolve. A voice whispering, "He did this. He put you here." One night, I met an old friend by accident. He was walking his dog near the park where I'd found a corner to rest. He almost didn't recognize me. When he did, he froze, eyes wide. "Henry. My God, what happened to you?" I swallowed hard. "My son happened." He took me to a diner, bought me a hot meal, and listened while I explained everything, from the documents I signed to being forced out of my home, to the endless nights outdoors. He kept shaking his head, disbelief turning into anger. "This is illegal," he said. "You need legal help." I told him I had no money for lawyers. No transportation. No strength. But he insisted, pulling out his phone and making calls until someone agreed to meet us pro bono. That night, when he dropped me at the shelter, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't deserve this, Henry. Not after everything you've done for that boy." I nodded. But inside, something snapped, a realization sharper than any pain I had felt so far. My son had stolen everything from me. But he had also given me something unexpected. A reason to fight back. Life on the streets taught me one simple truth: when a man loses everything, he becomes capable of anything. And I was no longer just a father who'd been betrayed. I was a man preparing to reclaim what was mine. The meeting with the lawyer wasn't planned. It was born out of desperation, the kind that makes you willing to sit in front of anyone who might throw you a lifeline. My old friend drove me across town to a cramped legal aid office tucked between a pawn shop and a strip mall tax center. The sign on the window said, "Hartman and Sons, Legal Support for Seniors." I remember thinking how ironic it was that strangers had sons who cared more for them than my own flesh and blood. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and cheap disinfectant. A young assistant with kind eyes handed me a cup of water and asked me to wait. I sat in a plastic chair with my oversized sneakers tapping nervously against the floor. I felt exposed, like every bruise of the last few months was written across my face. A few minutes later, a tall man with silver hair stepped out from an office. "Mr. Lawson," he said. I stood, gripping my bag. "Yes. I'm Attorney Hartman. Come in." I followed him into an office filled with books, framed certificates, and a single window that let in a thin strip of afternoon light. He gestured for me to sit. My knees cracked loudly as I lowered myself into the chair. "I understand you've been displaced," he said gently. "Tell me what happened." For the next hour, I told him everything, signing the papers, the social worker's visit, the locks being changed, the nights on the street. Each time I faltered, he urged me on with quiet nods. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern, to something close to outrage. When I finished, he reached for the folder I carried, the one holding the photocopies the social worker had given me. He scanned the pages quickly at first, then slower, eyebrows tightening. "Mr. Lawson," he said, tapping a particular paragraph, "did you understand the meaning of this clause when you signed it?" "No," I admitted. "My son said it was routine." "My eyesight, it's not what it used to be." He leaned back. "Your son created a living trust that transferred full authority to himself. But this section here," he pointed again, "states that the trust was altered under acknowledged medical decline. Did a doctor declare you incompetent?" My stomach clenched. "Never. I've never been declared anything. I'm old, but I'm not incapable." He nodded grimly. "Then this is fraud. Your son forged medical claims to justify stripping you of your property and assets. That's a crime." I stared at him, stunned. "A crime?" "Absolutely. Elder abuse. Financial fraud. Coercion. And because he used these documents to forcefully remove you from your home, there are grounds for civil action as well." It felt like a dam cracked open inside my chest, not relief, not yet, but something shifting. For the first time since the betrayal, someone was saying what I hadn't had the strength to admit: he didn't just wrong me, he broke the law to do it. Hartman rose, pacing slowly behind his desk. "Tell me something, Mr. Lawson. When you signed these papers, were you pressured in any way? Rushed? Misled?" "Yes," I whispered. "Completely." He nodded. "Then we're building a strong case. And we're starting immediately." Everything after that moved faster than I expected. Hartman contacted medical offices to confirm no such incompetency evaluation existed, which they confirmed in writing. He subpoenaed the notary who supposedly witnessed my voluntary agreement, a notary who, records showed, had been paid by my son's company. He gathered statements, bank activity logs, and the social worker's notes. Piece by piece, he constructed a timeline that revealed the truth. My son had planned this. Not in a moment of panic. Not out of concern. But deliberately, methodically, mapping out how to take everything I owned. As the evidence grew, my shame began to loosen its grip. The fog of humiliation that had wrapped around me for weeks began to thin. Each document Hartman uncovered felt like a match lighting the dark corners where my son's lies had been hiding. On the final day of evidence gathering, Hartman placed a stack of papers in front of me. "Mr. Lawson," he said, "you have been legally wronged at every step. Your son exploited your trust, forged medical claims, and manipulated legal channels for personal gain. You're not powerless. And you're not alone in this." My throat tightened. "What happens now?" Hartman smiled, the first smile I'd seen from him. "Now, Henry, we fight." For months, I had been sinking. But at that moment, for the first time since I'd been thrown out of my home, I felt myself rise. Not as a broken old man. Not as a victim. But as someone who finally had a weapon of his own. The first court date felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. I walked into the courthouse wearing a donated shirt and those oversized sneakers, gripping a folder of documents that Hartman insisted I carry. "Just so you remember you're not empty-handed," he told me. But truthfully, I felt small. Fragile. Out of place. Then I saw my son. He stood on the opposite side of the hallway wearing a tailored suit, polished shoes, and the smug composure of a man convinced he'd already won. His wife was beside him, whispering something that made him smirk. When he noticed me, his expression didn't soften. If anything, he looked annoyed, like I was an interruption to his busy schedule. "Dad," he said flatly, "you didn't have to drag this out. We could have handled everything privately." I stared at him for a long moment. "You threw me out of my own home," I said quietly. "Privacy ended the day you locked me out." Before he could respond, Hartman stepped between us. Save it for the judge, he said sharply. My son scoffed and walked away. Inside the courtroom, everything became procedural, but beneath the monotone legal language, the tension pulsed like a heartbeat. Hartman presented the forged medical claims, the manipulated trust, the notary's suspicious involvement, the sudden transfer of assets, the abrupt eviction. He laid it all out piece by piece, each document another blow to my son's facade. My son's attorney tried to frame me as confused, unstable, unable to manage my finances. But Hartman didn't flinch. Your Honor, he said, if Mr. Lawson is as incompetent as they claim, why was he still working part-time last year? Why does he have no medical diagnosis of cognitive decline? Why did his son arrange all legal documents privately, without involving any neutral party or medical professional? The courtroom fell silent. My son fidgeted. His arrogance began to crack. Then came the moment that sealed the case. The notary, subpoenaed by Hartman, testified. Nervous, sweating, stumbling over his words, he admitted he had notarized the papers without verifying my identity or assessing my understanding of the documents. He admitted my son had explained everything to him beforehand. He admitted he never saw any medical report. The judge's expression shifted from neutral to cold. Mr. Lawson, she said, turning to my son, you abused your position of trust. You exploited your father's vulnerability. You committed fraud. My son's face went pale. Then came the verdict, clear, decisive, irreversible. All property and assets were to be restored to me immediately. All fraudulent documents voided. My son was to be investigated for elder financial abuse. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like oxygen after nearly drowning. As bailiffs escorted my son out, his protests echoing against the walls, I realized something. The pain he caused had carved a hollow inside me. But the truth, spoken aloud in that courtroom, began filling it in again. Hartman placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it, he said softly. No, I replied. We did it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a legal win. This was the beginning of my reckoning. The day the sheriff handed me the keys back, my hands shook, not from weakness, but from something deeper. Something I hadn't felt since long before the betrayal, the weight of belonging. I stood in front of my house, and stared at the door I had once built with my own hands. Sunlight glinted off the windows. The yard was overgrown, the paint looked tired, but it was still mine. When I pushed the door open, a wave of stale air met me. My son and his wife had moved their things out in a rush after the ruling. The place looked abandoned, stripped of warmth, stripped of life. My footsteps echoed across the empty floors, and for a moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. This house had been the heart of our family, and yet it had nearly become my grave. I walked room to room, touching the walls, remembering everything they'd witnessed, Miriam humming in the kitchen, my son learning to walk down the hallway, birthdays, laughter, arguments, nights spent repairing things long after everyone else was asleep. Memories clung to every corner, but they no longer felt like home, they felt like ghosts. So I set to work. Not to restore the past, but to reclaim the present. I scrubbed every surface, repainted every wall, replaced old fixtures, cleared out years of clutter. I donated furniture that carried too much pain and kept only what still felt honest. It was slow, exhausting work for a man my age, but every stroke of the brush, every nail hammered, every floorboard polished felt like stitching myself back together. For the first time in months, I slept on a real mattress. I woke to the quiet hum of a house that was finally mine again. Not through inheritance, not through assumption, but through justice. I didn't reach out to my son. I didn't ask where he had gone or what came next for him. Revenge wasn't about watching him fall, it was about rising from the place he tried to bury me. The law had done its part, life would handle the rest. One evening, I sat on the front porch with Miriam's photo in my hands. The sunset washed the sky in colors she used to love. I imagined her voice in the breeze, gentle, warm. You fought back, she would have said. You didn't let them take your soul. I smiled for the first time in a long while. I wasn't the same man who had once been forced off his own doorstep. I was stronger now, hardened, yes, but sharpened too. I had learned a truth I should have known long ago. Love can be unconditional, but trust should never be. And dignity, once stolen, can be rebuilt. Brick by brick. Choice by choice. Breath by breath. People often assume the worst thing that can happen to an old man is losing his home. They're wrong. The worst thing is realizing the person you built that home for, the child you carried through every storm, was willing to push you into the rain just to stand a little taller. What my son did wasn't just theft. It was an erasure. A rewriting of history where my sacrifices no longer mattered. But life has a way of revealing its truths, whether we're ready or not. I used to believe love alone was enough to hold a family together. I believed loyalty was instinctive, that blood created bonds that couldn't be broken. Now I know better. Love without boundaries becomes a weapon. Trust without wisdom becomes a trap. And forgiveness without accountability becomes permission for someone to continue hurting you. Taking back my home wasn't the end of a battle, it was the reclaiming of myself. The courts restored my property, but rebuilding my dignity, that was something I had to do alone. And I did. Piece by piece. Day by day. With hands that life had tried to empty, but never fully conquered. If you've walked with me this far, if this story reminded you of something lost, or something you refused to lose, then you understand why I had to tell it. Betrayal may break a man, but truth, spoken aloud, can make him whole again. And if you appreciate real stories like this, stories that peel back the layers of family, justice, and survival, make sure you subscribe. There are more stories ahead, each with its own lesson written in scars. Because in the end, respect is the only inheritance that truly matters. And no one should ever have to fight this hard to reclaim it.